So thanks again for joining us. Again, I'm Jim Manning. I'm going to do some brief introductions here, and Bill will be presenting most of the content of this session, and then I'll sort of wrap up toward the end, along with my contact information for any follow-up questions afterward. Today's agenda will include, of course, the introductions I just mentioned, but Bill's going to cover at a high level, again, best practices overviews for workflows, dialogues, advanced find, dashboards, goals, and reports. And again, more detailed best practices coverage will be offered in subsequent sessions to follow in this order. And I'm going to close up in today's session with a description of some ways to address the biggest problem that, in my experience, existing users of CRM systems in general, not just Microsoft CRM certainly, have experienced, and that is CRM adoption. Anybody who is an administrator of a CRM system knows what a challenge this can be, and we're going to offer some advice for how that can be addressed, and even describe an offering we've developed for our customers for addressing that on an ongoing basis so that everybody in this call can maximize the value of their CRM system. And finally, I'll open up the phone lines to Q&A. But again, you have the ability to submit a question through GoToMeeting, and I would encourage everybody to do that. Just by way of introduction, the Affiliated Resource Group is a national Microsoft CRM partner. We've been in business for a very long time for somebody who does what we do, 17 years. Now, obviously, Microsoft CRM hasn't been around as long, so we have a number of competencies. The one that you folks probably care the most about, of course, is the customer relationship management competency, and we have achieved the highest level of competency from Microsoft. We've also been awarded all the highest awards that can be won by somebody who does what we do over the 7 years that we have been implementing Microsoft CRM. Bill Owens heads our CRM practice. He's been with the company almost as long as it's been in existence, 15 years. 7 years of that time he has been our practice manager for Microsoft CRM and has built it from just himself, from scratch, up to the national presence that we currently hold with our CRM deployments. As you can see, he's got an experience with every version of the Microsoft CRM application, from the very painful beginnings, 1.2, through the only moderately painful version 3 to version 4, and now to version 2011, which we all think very, very highly of. He's a CRM advocate, lives and breathes it, and that'll be evident when he begins his presentation. You know, we all are evangelists of the Microsoft CRM system here at Affiliated, none more so than Bill. He has a blog that's very widely covered. We track who looks at the blog, and we see people logging in from all around the world to view the latest musings from Bill Owens, offers of advice on various topics, and it's updated regularly. So I would encourage everybody to go ahead and check it out and see some of the other best practices and other advice that Bill has to offer. Again, we're going to be following this presentation with an email containing a PDF version of this presentation. So you can either write down that address, or you'll see it in the PDF you receive shortly afterward. Just one last thing. If everybody on the lines can mute their phones and not place the call into hold so we hear hold music, that would be deeply appreciated. Thank you very much. The next thing I'd like to do before we do get into the meat of the presentation is to ask a couple of quick questions. We'd like to know a little bit more about the folks on this call. So let me first ask a question of you. Are you a CRM administrator currently? If you could just select one of those and indicate one way or another what your level of use of Microsoft CRM is. I'm going to give that just a second for folks to indicate. Good. I can see we've got a heavy representation of Microsoft CRM administrators, not surprisingly.
Remind people that they can hit *6 to mute.
Yes. Again, hit *6 to mute your line if you could. All right. I'll close that poll out and just show, about 4 out of 5 of you are currently CRM administrators. Love the soothing classical music. That's very, very nice. One other question. How long have you been administering CRM? This will, again, just give us an idea of the level of your experience with the system. I'll share the results shortly, but if everybody could just sort of give me a quick indicator of how long you've been using the system, that'll be helpful. Again, not surprisingly, we've got a lot of folks who are fairly new to the system. I'll give it another 10 seconds or so. If you could go ahead and log your answer, that'd be helpful. Here you can see what I see. So most folks are fairly new. We've got some in the middle there and a few that have been around a very long time, like Bill. Two more questions, I swear. What version are you using? I've got this in reverse order so I can see, if where folks are with the application. And anybody who is on version 1 or 1.2 can appreciate the humor in that last answer. But good to see there's a lot of folks out there that are on the latest version, particularly because the examples we use are all going to be in 2011. So a heavily weighted toward 2011. And let me just ask one additional question before we go ahead and get started. How long has your system been deployed? Of course, the version would tell me something, but wouldn't necessarily tell me everything that you need to know about how long you've had the system in place. Go ahead and just select one there, and then I swear that's the last question I'm going to ask before we let Bill take over. All right, very helpful. Thank you very much for participating in those polls. I think that's very, it'll be very enlightening. So, you've heard enough from me. Let me hand it over to the CRM advocate and evangelist himself, Bill Owens. Take it away, Bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Well, thanks for attending the webinar. So let me get started with saying, what is a best practice? A lot of people have asked me, what is a best practice, and do you have any best practices? And what I've found out over time is a lot of people are kind of confused about where to start with this. And it seems like an ambiguous area to start with. But really what a best practice is, let's just start with that. A best practice is really nothing more than a way to do something that will save yourself some pain later on. If I have anybody in this meeting that is a PM, you're probably thinking, well, that sounds like lessons learned from a project, and you'd be absolutely correct. Basically, at the end of every project, you sit around and go, hey, what caused us a significant amount of pain, and what can we do not to incur that again later on? Also, what did we do right? And you take that down into consideration as well. And those things actually become your best practices. The other thing to keep in mind about what best practice really is that it's a best practice for you and your organization. Not every time will a best practice always fit every organization. So the best practices that I'm going to be showing you today are the ones that we commonly use when we implement CRM for our clients. They won't always fit everybody, so change them. These are yours. When I give you these PDFs, take them, modify them, do what you want with them, from the fact that you need to modify them for your own business. I'm trying to give you everybody a jump start into best practices and giving you some in here. By far, most people, if you've been in the CRM for a while, you'll look down and say, you know what, I have a couple I could add to this. Add to it. I'm just trying to give you a jump start into it. So, again, what Jim was talking about is this webinar is a part of a series. This one right now is going to be a very high-level overview of the best practices over 6 areas. I'm going to be following up monthly, covering each one of the areas in more detail in follow-up webinars. So let's go ahead and get into the next one. And the first one on my list is workflows. The reason workflows is my first one on the list is because by far this is one that everybody causes problems with right away if you don't do a little bit of best practices up front. First of all, a lot of times when you're dealing with best practices, naming conventions. Naming conventions become paramount for almost everything you deal with in best practices. So what we've come up with is a common naming structure here to help us label and organize our workflows as we're developing them. And basically it's like entity, a group, and the E99 is the email part of it, and I'll talk about that in a second, and that's optional, and then a description. This picture you see on the right-hand side, this is a copy of the PDF. You will actually be getting this stuff in the email in a little bit. So don't freak out because you can't read it because it's really small. Don't worry about print screening it and trying to magnify it. You'll get a PDF in a little bit. But anyway, when we're talking about this, if you want to do your naming conventions and you want to organize it, so one of the things, even though that workflow actually, when you set up workflow, it always tells you asks you what entity you're going to be doing this with. That's great. Still put the entity inside of it because a lot of times you just see the workflow names all in one spot and you never see which one it's attached to. So it's good to organize it in that manner. The other side of it is that you really want to, and this is going to cause a lot of headaches and heartaches for some people, burn an account. Create a CRM admin account out there. If you're going to be doing a lot of stuff with the workflows, create an admin account because you want all your workflows to be owned by this person. I've seen it in the past hundreds of times, it seems like, that people will have an administrator be the person that's creating the workflows all the time, and then he or she leaves, and then it's a pain to get things changed around. So really, if you're going to do a lot of stuff with workflows, have a standard account that you have all the workflows assigned to, and that's the one you actually maintain it with. Now, create a separate workflow for emails. If you notice above on the entity, on the naming conventions, you'll see I have entity, group, and then E99. The E99 is actually labeling which emails. So I'll start with E01 for the first email in, say, I work with accounts or opportunities. The reason is you want to spread out your emails into separate workflows for several different reasons. One of the nice things is 2011's fixed part of the problem we had before, and that was if email actually was trying to be sent out and the contact or whoever you were sending to didn't have an email address, email failed. And it was hard, you couldn't recover from it. You can now recover in 2011 with it, but still, best practices would be to check to make sure that your email, the email people you're sending to actually have email before you send it. And what you can do is you can set up your workflow, do all the checks, and then if they fail out, send the owner the contact an email saying, hey, you need to make sure that this person has an email address. And when you're done, run this workflow for me, please. And that way you have a way to self-heal and be proactive on this instead of having a whole bunch of failed emails out there and wonder what's going on. Purge your log files. If anybody here has history with 4.0 and before, you'll find, and done a lot with workflows, you'll realize that the workflows have this wonderful logging function that takes up copious amounts of disk space. In 4.0, we have the capability to, using a registry entry on one of the patches that came up, the roll-ups, to say anytime a workflow is completed normally, delete it. But that is an all or nothing. Yeah, but nice thing in 2011 is on the second tab, the administration tab on a workflow, on every one of the workflows, down at the bottom is a flag saying delete this workflow when it's completed normally. It's the same thing, but you can actually now cherry pick it. And this works out great. So make sure you purge your log files or rent some more space from Microsoft if you're hosted, or buy some more disk drives if you're local, because the log files can take up a lot of room. I had one client, just to give you an example on this, one client that we implemented CRM and they had tons of workflows. About 2 months later, they called me up saying their system's really slow, and I come in and look at it, and they had 10 gig worth of data in their databases. They were really using CRM, but they also had 70 gig worth of workflow logs. Took me a while to clean that up. And that's because and out of that 70 gig, there was only 2.5 million rows of data. So if you actually do the math, it takes up quite a little bit of space, each one of those workflow logs. So please purge them. The other thing is minimize your wait state. Now, most of you who are on CRM Online say, I really don't have to worry about that because it's on a Microsoft hosted server. And in reality, yeah, you might be able to say that, but in practice, you really want to try to minimize it because it will speed up how things are being done, get things out of the logs faster for you so you know what's going on. And by what I mean by minimize the wait state is a lot of times people will say, like if I'm doing case management, they'll create a workflow that says wait 7 days after it's been created and check to see if the status is closed or resolved. And if it is not resolved, escalate it up to the next level. Although it's real simple to do with the workflow, that keeps the item on the wait state forever, for 7 days. And what happens is every time CRM has to wake up every now and then and go, hey, do I have anything out there that is in a wait state? Yes. Has that time resolved itself? No. Okay, go back to sleep. And you have 1,000, it's not too bad. You have 10,000, it starts getting a little slower, and it gets exponential after that. So what you want to do is minimize it. So instead of saying wait 7 days, because here's the other side of it, most of these, if you go back into it, look at it, most of these cases are closed within the first day. So 90% of them close first day, but yeah, I'm going to have them hanging out there for 6 extra days. What we'll do is we'll come in and we'll say, hey, if we'll do the reverse of it, say, wait 1 day, wake up. If resolved, then exit the workflow. Wait another day right after it, do the same thing. If it's resolved, exit. And you keep doing that until you get to the last day. Then you say, if not resolved, now escalate. And what will happen is it'll drop off faster. So you really want to make sure that you have minimize your wait states. The other thing is you want to keep your logic flat and end it quickly. Now, if I have any developers on the phone or on this webinar, you're going to cringe when I say try not to nest your logic. What you know about good coding standards does not really work well inside of Microsoft workflows. And the reason is because it lulls you into the sense that it's actually a language, because you have if statements, and you have case statements, and you can do certain things inside of it, and it can nest the logics, else, if, all that other wonderful stuff. But the real problem is this. You can't move logic around. You can't copy and paste. If you delete an if statement, everything in between the beginning of the if statement to the end of it disappears. And that's about the time you start crying. So another thing I always tell my people is before you start working on a workflow, make a copy of it first. Because it's not so good when some of that stuff disappears. And that's another reason why you do emails in a separate workflow, is because you can't copy and paste it. But in a lot of workflows, we might call the same emails 3 or 4 times. Well, instead of having it 3 or 4 times inside the system, you really just want to call a single workflow 3 or 4 times. So keep your logic flat. Keep it close to the left-hand side as possible. I mean, don't indent as much. Keep it simple. If you can do some if statements up above to drop out, drop out. Whenever you're done with the logic and you know the rest of the stuff's going to fail through, stop the workflow. Exit the. Go ahead and put the line in to say stop the workflow. Make sure you get out and make sure you keep this thing clean. So the next thing is if you notice, my workflow and my dialogues are the same color over here. And they're the same color because, frankly, Dialogs, which is brand new with 2011, is actually another extension of workflows. Most of my quick reference sheets are all color-coded depending on what subject I'm dealing with, but Dialogs and workflows are actually the same thing. What Dialogs are really workflows on steroids. What you can do is you can execute off workflows with pop-up pages, asking questions, pulling data from the system, doing queries, and it's a very powerful tool. And my future webinar on that one will actually go into more details of how to use them. But part of the things that we're going to talk about here is naming conventions again. You really want to make sure that you name these things appropriately. Like on the dialogues, entity and description, dialogue pages. Oh my, here's where I had a complicated one, and it got very confusing very quickly, is you might have multiple pages, and after a while, if you don't name them with something that you can identify quickly, it became very confusing to figure out where did the fields come from, where did which pages am I dealing with, and so forth. So what I have is this P99 is which page number. So am I page 1 or page 2? Which page am I dealing with? And then on the dialog field page fields, we put the page and the label. Name those fields by the page, because there's another thing is you start creating fields across all these different pages, and you ask what's your name in 3 different pages, because you can do that because you can have pages that you can have logic saying, well, if this criteria matches, go to this page, otherwise do another page or a separate page. So you can have 3 different pages as your first one that, depending on where you're at in your data, you see, but they all ask the same questions or just slightly different questions, and people tend to name the fields the same thing, and then when you look on a list and you see 3 name fields, you're like, okay, which one was I talking about? Those are some of the things with that one. Now, variables. Definitely on the variables. You're going to want to start naming those things a little bit better. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about like the queries and input arguments. When you use a query in CRM, you can actually query data using fetch XML or advanced type of find to get it. But put the word query in front of it. That way you can put all your queries together, and it makes it a lot easier to understand what the data is that you're working with. And the input arguments, we typically put an IN underscore in front of it. So you'll see the stuff inside the best practice sheet as I send it out to you. Now the other thing is multiple pages, multiple dialogues. Again, try to spread out your logic. Okay, like on workflows, you're going to want to keep things flat and try to be discrete on your information. Have multiple workflows. That way, when you change one, you can use it in multiple places and do code reuse. So if the pages within the dialogues do not require variables from the input arguments, the dialog variables or other pages, then you can create a child dialog and execute instead of place all the logic in one dialog. And then this will keep it easier for you to maintain and to build upon. All right. The next thing would be to keep the logic discrete. You've heard me say that many times. Execute the workflows when you do not need excuse me. Execute workflows when you do not need dialogue-related fields whenever possible. Because you see inside of dialogues, because it's part of the workflows, people tend to have a tendency to start writing more code inside of there in their if statements. Whereas to me, it's more of a discrete entity. You're going to want to create workflows that you actually execute from within the dialogues, and that way, again, keep it more contained. Break up the dialogues and workflows into small, reusable, discrete chunks of logic if you can. And then the diagram I give down here is showing you where some of the stuff's at on the screens. All right, so let's run into the next one. The next one is advanced find. And for those of my customers that are on the line, you'll hear me say advanced find is your friend. And you're probably laughing because most of my clients hear me say that all the time. Advanced find is a great way to make this tool run for you. Okay, data is data, but you have to be able to extrapolate it out into something. Yes? Can you please hit *6?
Yes, please mute your line. Thank you.
So you want to be able to use advanced find to pull out your data into information, something you could act upon. And advanced find is that what's going to happen and make that happen for you. So the first thing I typically teach is how to start up advanced find. And what that is if you'll go to the place where you find all your data, and then at the top hit the advanced find button, it'll actually memorize, read from the screen what entity you're on and what view you're on. And I find when people are starting up with CRM Advanced Find, it's easier for them to use that method than to have the choice of 50 different entities and then the views underneath it. People tend to need to see the data in front of them to understand where they're starting, because that's what's going to be your base that you're starting from. So example being, if I was wanting to find all the contacts in Ohio, all active contacts in Ohio, I would go to Contacts, and I'd go to open up the Active Contacts view, and then I'd use Advanced Find from there, because then I would limit it down. The next thing is security. If you own a saved view, you can share the view with the other users. However, you should create teams instead of sharing them with individuals. And what I mean by this is it's easy in CRM to share things with it. So you can create a view, an advanced find, save it, and it's a personal view. You can save it, and you can actually share it with other people. But what I really would suggest is that you create teams and share them with the teams, because when you try to unshare it, it causes a lot of problems because you just can't do a mass unshare. You can do a mass assign, a mass share, but you can't do a mass unshare. And so it's a lot easier to deal with the teams when you're doing your sharing. Now, if you want to limit a custom view to a team of people, again, create a team. This is a question that a lot of people always ask me is how to do that. And it's really nice in 2011 because the teams have security in them, and it makes life a lot easier. Okay, so but the thing is when you're creating the teams, just remember to give them a security role, or you may find yourself having some issues later on. Now, the other thing is that when you're dealing with advanced finds, a lot of times when you're dealing with one entity, it's fine, it's easy. And then what we have this thing is called multi-level queries, meaning that, say I want my contacts that are associated with accounts, that the accounts are associated with a marketing list. Well, that's 3 entities. I'm starting off with my contacts, I'm going to my accounts, and then going to the marketing list attached to the accounts. When you start nesting with this, test every level. Start with the contacts, make sure that I'm getting the right amount of information there, then attach to the account. And as soon as I do that, run the advanced find and make sure I'm getting data back. Make sure it's working. The one thing I've found out through history with other people is that people tend to know exactly what they want. They put it all into it, and they get down to the end, and they hit the find button, and no data comes back. And then you have to roll back, and it's painful, and then they're redoing it, where if they just took a couple extra seconds and tested at each step, you'll save yourself a lot of problems. The other thing is that you're going to want to set your personal options. By default, Microsoft has it set up in simple mode, and frankly, if you're using anything with Advanced Find, most people want to just change their personal option to be in detailed. So just change it to detailed. And now the quick sheet I have here shows you how to do that as well. The last thing that's on this quick sheet here is the related. A lot of people have problems with related and trying to figure out what is what. When you get down to that related, especially when you're dealing with contacts, you will see a load of different options, and they get confusing. So this spreadsheet, this quick sheet right here will help you identify a little bit inside of there, because you'll see like accounts as a primary contact. Basically, the one on the left-hand side would be the entity, and the right-hand side is actually the field, the display name that's on the entity being shown. In this case, it would be a contact now, or an account. Actually, let's see. This is okay. So now, if we go down a little bit further, you'll see things that are individuals, like orders. Those are to the entities. Then you'll see another one. The one that really causes a lot of people problems is like parent customer and then account, and you'll see a parent customer contacts. And what happens is that, let's just say I'm doing this for the account, and a lot of my clients will say, hey, Bill, why don't you rename parent customer to parent account or to account? And I keep trying to tell them to name it so that you understand that it's not another entity, because a lot of them, the parent account works fine, but the account does not work. And the reason is the display label will come back to be account. So when you look down your related, you'll see account and account contact, and all it really does is confuse people. So be aware that when you change your labels on the screen, you will affect the related capabilities of the advanced find.
You're doing fine on time.
All right. So the next one we have is dashboards. Dashboards is new to 2011. Well, sort of. If you're CRM 4.0 online, you had dashboards, and now the 2011 version of the dashboards has been much improved. Again, naming conventions. Okay, the system dashboard name should be clearly explain what will be displayed within the dashboard. Name the dashboard with a holistic action approach. Example, if the majority of the charts on the dashboard deal with lead process and where the leads are in the process, call the dashboard lead process. Just make sure it's named something that people can identify with. And remember, if you limit the views to the data to show only your data, then you should start the name with mine. Example, my lead process. So again, on that note, is if the dashboard is limited to mine, make sure you put the word mine inside the dashboard. Otherwise, it will confuse people. Now, the naming convention on charts. Oh my, that's the one that really gets people in trouble. And the reason is because when you're creating a chart, the first thing that the chart asks you for is the view used for the chart preview. So the first thing it asks you is a view name. So people start try to name the charts with the view part of it, like my leads by state. Well, guess what? That's wrong. The chart itself does not contain the view. It's just going over the data. The reason that the first thing it asks you for when you're defining a chart is what view to use for the preview is just that. It's trying to show you what the data is going to look like. You need some data. So the view is not part of the chart. Just please keep that in mind because that's a common mistake everybody uses. All right? And then when you're naming it, you don't want to name it by the actions from the screen. And again, when you get my quick sheet, this will make a little bit more sense when you see it. It works out pretty nicely to name it because a lot of people, when they start naming the charts, name them very simply at first, but they really mean a little bit more later on. You'll find that you'll need to be a little bit more descriptive so you can pull the right charts. Okay, the next thing is visual acuity. Choose the right chart type to display your data. Consider what will happen when there is a lot of information included on the chart. Example being, 50 states, bar charts may not be the right one, maybe a pie chart. Okay, something you're going to have to figure out which ones are going to look better depending on the data you have, because not every chart will display the data appropriately for you. Make sure your lists have room that they need to function correctly. Place them on the bottom of the page for best effect. Because you see what happens is a lot of people will put lists on the screen and they'll put them on the left-hand side or in the middle, and they're really hard to see. So what we typically do is try to shove all the lists down to the bottom of the screen because you want to keep your quick and dirty information up at the top. And what I mean by quick and dirty is a chart says 1,000 words. Okay, a visual graph says things quickly. Lists you have to go read. So keep the quick stuff at the top. Arrange it from top left to top right, then bottom left to bottom right, and then over to the right again. And this makes it like a Z. You'll see it on the screen right here. You don't want to make a Z on the main screen. And the reason is if anybody's done any web design, there's a lot of heuristics behind this, but this is how people actually read screens. When someone sees a screen, they quickly scan it in a big old Z fashion to get the initial look out of what's on the screen. So if you design with that in mind, you'll hit a lot more people quickly and easily. When you use an iframe, this is one that I've seen some problems. You need to be careful about the thing called cross-browser security. And with the thing about cross-browser security, it's a little bit more technical. I want to really get into in this webinar. But for those people that are dealing with iframes on these things, you should keep in mind and look at the cross-browser security. You'll find by turning it off, things will start working. But be aware that you're actually releasing some security for IE, and there's potential for bad things to happen. So make sure it's a trusted site you're actually going to. Just don't make it ad hoc. All right? Okay, so let's see. Some of the other stuff, miscellaneous advice. If you create a personal dashboard and you want to share it with others, share it to a team. Again, this goes back to like advanced finds. Make sure you share it to teams, not to individuals. If a group of people are to see the dashboard and no one else, set up the team and assign the security role. Assign the users to the team, and then assign the ownership of the dashboard to that team. So that dashboard can be owned by a team, and then that way you can make sure that it's limited down to just those people on the team. And the other thing is test, test, test. One of the problems I see a lot of people do is they'll make things real quickly and they don't test the data. They don't look at the data, and they don't verify that what they're seeing is actually correct. And when you're dealing with dashboards, you're summarizing a lot of information in one spot, and people are going to make decisions upon that data. And the worst thing you can do is put something together that's not displaying the right data, and people are making the wrong decisions. And again, I want to remind everybody, if you have your phone out there and you can't put it on mute, *6 will mute your phone. So the next thing is goals. Goals, again, this is new to CRM 2011. And you shouldn't be surprised now to see that naming conventions are the first thing on my best practice list. So when you're dealing with your goals, you want to name it by fiscal period, your owner, and then the goal. Again, this goes back sort of like how we're talking about with workflows, where you want to put the entity name in it, because if you look at goals, you'll see all this information is part of the goal, but frankly, people don't see the whole record all the time. They just see the name of the goal, and it makes it better, and it's easier to deal with, because when you're dealing with goals, you're dealing with a lot of data, because if you're doing quarterly goals, it's not so bad, but if you're doing monthly goals and you have 10 people, 120 lines for this year, that's great. It all adds up fairly quickly. Okay, so this is one of the spots where you really need to start paying attention to naming conventions. Otherwise, you're going to have a mess really quickly. Okay, goal matrices, define those by entity and then type of description. Okay, now the roll-up query. Oh, this was the fun one when I first started learning this. Is what is a roll-up query and how does that really work? And really, when you start dealing with the roll-up queries, and I'll talk about this in the goals webinar, but frankly, the goals keep in mind who the owner of the information of the goal is and applies the queries to it. You use a roll-up query whenever you have to bypass the ownership of the data, and that's when you really do it. And if you're into that part of the goals, I suggest you do a little bit of homework, because you're into a little bit of a hairy area. But the other thing I found out too is you really want to agree to fiscal standards. Okay, you can change the fiscal information to the goals and so forth as you're going through it, but we're going to put that as part of our naming convention. And so you're really going to want to make sure that everybody understands how we're going to name things fiscally going forward, and we adopt a standard practice to it. Now here's the big thing, goals. You know, I can sit down with my salespeople, you heard Jim earlier, and they can tell you all about their goals. And they can tell you what their goals are, how it's all formulated and everything else, but the real thing is when it comes down to it, you really need to map out what does it mean. Because a lot of times I've been talking to people, and their idea of a goal, the numbers, they might be using the same naming conventions or nomenclature, but they might mean something slightly different. So before you start doing anything with this, map out what it really means. Is it all opportunities that were open, closed? What does closed mean? Is it closed from your sales stage or actually closed from an opportunity standpoint? I mean, you need to go through each one of those and define what it really is and map it out. So by entity, you want to map out each one of these goals and what it means and do an advanced find. Make some advanced finds and save off those queries and validate that the numbers that you're going to get out would be correct. Once you've done validating what your goals are going to be and your numbers, then go make it. Okay, go make your goals. And then what I want you to do is test, test, test. This is by far the most paramount area that you should test. If you test nothing else, this is the area that it cause you least grief. You should test very, very heavily. And the reason is this is sort of like working with payroll. I know Jim right over here, well, if I had this thing set up wrong about his goals for what he's tracking for how much he's supposed to be making selling this month versus next month, or the quarterly goals. This deals with his pay.
Yep.
Yep. You can hear him. He's kicking me right. Don't mess it up. Okay. You want to test this stuff. This goes. I've got over 20 years in the IT field, and every time I had to deal with payroll, I always hated it because I always tested it 4 times longer than I tested everything else, because these are the people that you work with that are going to come strangle you. They know where you sit. All right? So make sure you test the stuff adequately. Make sure you test it above adequately. Test it and make sure it's all good, or suffer the consequences. Now, when I got to the reports, one of the things about reports is this is one of those areas where I think it's going to diverge quite a little bit based upon your organization. So what I try to do with this one is turn it more into a quick reference card versus practices, and give you a little bit of practice and a little bit of reference as well. So I gave you all the report parameters that are actually being passed in to CRM 2011. Okay, so those are all the report parameters. I'm actually kind of excited that they're doing it that way instead of the way that they were doing it before in CRM 4.0. I like these parameters better. It works out much nicer. But it's easy. It's nice to have the list of them handy and available for you. Now, when you're creating a report in 2011 online, I hope you understand the word fetch XML, because you're going to start using fetch XML quite a little bit. Okay, so CRM 2011 uses Fetch XML to capture data online. Before you start your report, use Advanced Find to pull a list of all the data that you're going to need in your report. Because in Advanced Find, you can actually download your Fetch XML on the screen. There's a button now that says Download Fetch XML. Use the report wizard online to start your report. In Microsoft CRM 2011, actually in 4.0, they had this thing called Report Wizard. And it works nice, but it basically gives you a nice report over views. You can take it a little bit step further. I've only found 5% difference in the way we've used it that an advanced find view wouldn't work. There's about 5% inside of there where you can actually do a little bit more with it. But when I got into it, I was just writing. Once I hit that 5%, I was usually writing a report anyway. So in 4.0, you cannot upload a custom report to CRM, but in 2011, you can upload a custom report to CRM 2011 online. Okay, if you're on premise on 4.0 or 2011, no big deal. It's just the online part that was having a lot of problems with uploading a report in 4.0. In 2011, you use this thing called Fetch XML instead of SQL. So if you're writing reports, you probably use, in the past, you probably used SQL to generate your report data, but now you're going to be using this thing called Fetch XML, and that's a whole separate class to talk about. All right, but I use the report wizard online to start my report. What it's going to do is it's going to give me my headers, it's going to start it up for me, it's going to put my footers, it's going to get all my report parameters. It's a great starting point because you can start it up, save it off, download the RDL, which is report data layout. You download that out and you use your Visual Studio to edit it, to put your Fetch XML into it and start formatting, put your image on, whatever you want. But it's a great starting point. Okay. Now you're going to also want to maybe create reports if you're on premise. Now if you're on premise, you can use the same standards as above with Fetch XML, but you don't have to. You're actually released from really needing the Fetch XML part of it because you're on premise and you can actually use SQL Server calls to actually get your SQL statements to actually get your data. So you can use SQL if the Fetch XML will not capture data you require. You can the report may exceed the complexity of Fetch XML in the future, and you may need to use multiple SQL sources. Those are primary reasons why you'd want to use the SQL, other than being familiar with SQL statements. The Fetch XML is nice. Here's the great news. You can now use Fetch XML online to generate reports. The bad news is Fetch XML in itself has some limitations of what you can do, because you can do a ton of stuff with SQL statements. So what I'm trying to say is medium complexity and below reports can now be done online. Medium complexity and low complexity to complicated beyond all belief can be done on premise. Now, when you're dealing with your reports, you're going to definitely want to use the CRM filter. Microsoft CRM, when you upload an RDL to the system, a report to the system, if you use the report filtering built into it, what will happen is Microsoft CRM will actually ask for a filter information beforehand. And what I mean by filter is like, maybe I want all active accounts in this territory. That's a filter. I want all active accounts in this territory with a opportunity that was closed last month. I mean, that's a filter. Okay, but if you have to code those things with report parameters, they get a little bit wild and cumbersome after a while. And Microsoft has a really good report filtering built into it. Now, the last thing on here is which editor you use. In summary, I've given what's required for 4 and on-premise and online, and CRM in both versions. But in reality, what I'm trying to say here is, if you look out there, Microsoft has a free version of the report builder, and I've had many customers use it, and it's okay to get started with, but really what happens is most people who are starting to use the reporting find fairly quickly that they go past what that thing is capable of doing for them. So what I'm trying to say is, if you have Visual Studio, use it. Use Visual Studio. If you don't, the SQL Server comes with an instance of Visual Studio that you can use for editing your reports as well. So what I'm trying to, again, down to the end of this message on this one, is try to use the standard Visual Studio editor instead of the report builder. Now, with that, I'm going to pass this off to Jim, and he's going to talk a little bit about the CRM adoption. Now, I'm also going to be looking at all the questions that were out there and see what we can do to answer them.
Thank you very much, Bill. I think you'll all agree that his expertise is pretty evident. He's learned a lot over that 7-year period. I'm going to talk a little bit about one topic that is near and dear to our hearts here at Affiliated, and probably near and dear to the hearts of everybody on this call. It's something that we begin to think about from the first meeting that I have with a prospective customer thinking about deploying a CRM system through the entire deployment and after go live, and that is the adoption of the CRM system. It would be helpful for me to understand a little bit more about what sort of users we have on the call here. So let me ask just 2 more questions of you, if I could. The first is, how many users do you have on your CRM system? This will help me sort of gauge whether or not, how big a problem adoption may be. Is it small, medium, or extra large system? Very good. Pretty even distribution. Let me share the results with you here. I'm going to just close it up here in just a second. All right, and then I'll go ahead and share. So very evenly divided between smaller and larger customers. And finally, we'll know a little bit about what you're doing with the system. It's been my experience that adoption is easier to achieve among customer service representatives since it's very central to their role. It's almost as easily achieved with marketing folks and most difficult to achieve with salespeople. Being one, I can confess that I'm challenged day to day to keep things up to date in CRM, and I'm the evangelist here along with Bill and his team. So again, very, very enlightening and probably about what I would expect. It's been my experience that most folks who use CRM start with sales, roll into service, and then utilize the marketing capabilities. So thank you very much for helping with that. So let's talk about CRM adoption. As you can tell from, well, your own experience and from Bill's presentation, Microsoft or CRM isn't just a new technology that you can roll out to the field and expect to be embraced warmly and used without any sort of ongoing care and feeding. CRM represents a huge change in culture for many organizations that deploy it. Folks who hang around me a long time get tired of me making the comparison of CRM to an ERP or an accounting system. And CRM is really like deploying an accounting system that has no generally accepted accounting principles and no dedicated bookkeeper. So if you can imagine an accounting system being rolled out where there were no taxes to be recorded and nobody who was responsible for maintaining it, that is what you have with a CRM system. So the governance of the system lies completely within the control of internal folks there. And if you simply build the system and roll it out and expect people to use it, you will quickly find that the system will not be used. So the CRM system needs to become a central part of your sales environment, your service environment, and even your marketing environment. And the quickest way to do that is to run your reporting and measure performance from what is in CRM. Nothing will assure compliance, adoption, call it what you will, quicker than if you are judging performance based on what's in there. Add value. If you treat your CRM system like a paperless Rolodex, it will be used like a paperless Rolodex. But of course, CRM is much more important than just, or offers much more value, I should say, than just the collection of names, addresses, phone numbers, and other things. I mean, you're compiling a sales funnel. You are tracking activities and doing a lot of other things, tracking service cases, organizing your marketing campaigns, and other things potentially using the XRM capability of Microsoft CRM. well beyond that. So it needs to be more than just a paperless Rolodex. But the real point of this bullet is that by giving folks the capability to access information centrally through CRM that they might have to otherwise access through disparate systems, various spreadsheets, your ERP, and so forth. And the best example I can use is to give people access to sales history from your accounting system. The more drawn they will be to the system. If there is a single point where they can, where a salesperson, the most difficult to work with salesperson, and they're able to see all their account history from within the CRM system, and it used to be a big hassle to them, they will quickly realize that the system is worth maintaining. Leverage your existing tools. So obviously a huge benefit of Microsoft CRM is the Outlook integration, so that people start from a familiar place, and the ability to integrate easily, pass data back and forth with tools like Excel and Word. But the ability that you have to leverage existing tools and integrate with your ERP, to integrate to your website for lead capture and other purposes, and I would put leverage your existing tools. I would put smartphones and mobile devices under this heading as well. Giving people or making them aware of the fact that they can access the data from mobile devices will again make them more likely to feed the system, so to speak, because they'll want to be able to access it from those devices, and they'll realize that it won't be accessible unless it's in the system. Sell the value to your sales users. I'm picking on my people, the sales people here in this, but if you can, you need to describe the reasons why they need to use the system in terms that translate into dollars. It needs to be explained that the system will save them time and will enable them to drive greater sales, especially if you're incorporating marketing functionality into the system. If they import their lead lists, if they enter leads into the system, that information can be leveraged by marketing and that sort of thing. Trading. It's important to build power users and evangelists so that folks aren't running to IT every time they have a simple question about CRM. That expertise needs to be pushed down to the end user community through the building of power users and evangelists on the line, so to speak, within your sales services and marketing organizations, so that it's not just the IT person or the boss beating into them that they need to use this system. Clearly, the person who's going to be most able to enforce adoption is the person who signs the paychecks, but the least powerful person may be the person in IT that folks in sales, service, and marketing don't report to. But a peer can have a lot of influence on another peer, and so that's why we believe heavily that power users and evangelists among the users need to be developed. And finally, burn the ships. This means no going back. Kill any redundant legacy platforms that someone may feel is a good idea to run in parallel. The best example I can think of this is I attended a user group meeting not too long ago, and one of the folks there was complaining that their users had simply not adopted the system, and a little conversation brought to the surface the fact that their own sales managers were still asking their salespeople to produce call reports in Excel the same way that they always had, not within CRM exporting to Excel, but directly within CRM. Well, it's little wonder why nobody's adopting the system. Their system is a completely redundant hassle in the eyes of the salespeople, and I can't blame them. So my recommendation was retire the Excel-based reporting immediately. Now, again, as I mentioned early on, adoption is something that we spent a lot of time talking to our clients about from the very beginning and about on an ongoing basis. And we've recently developed some plans that we are promoting to our customer base to promote adoption and support. You know, now that we are well within the product life cycle with Microsoft CRM, it's been around for 8 years, and we have clients who've been using the system for 4 or 5 years, and there's been turnover. The existing users who were around at the very beginning, their knowledge of the system, the training they received deteriorates over time, and that's something that needs to be refreshed from time to time. So I've got my animation out of order here. So the first thing that we would recommend is regularly scheduled training sessions. This is something that we offer to our clients, or will be offering to our clients, a monthly sort of CRM basic training offering online where we cover the very basics. And this is really designed for people who need a refresher course or new clients. And this will cover core concepts for CRM and also, of course, in-depth question and answer period, so that new users to the system or people who are who want to sharpen their skills in particular areas have the opportunity to meet with a CRM expert virtually and to receive refresher training that they may not have had in quite some time. Quarterly system review and recommendations. This is an important central system to many of our clients, one that requires regular care and feeding. So an in-depth analysis covering the topics that you've heard Bill describe and many others, where we can offer recommendations for how to achieve the value of the system to the maximum extent possible, offer new ideas for reporting, for dashboards, for leveraging additional functionality within the system, things of that nature. System governance engagement. This would include a full audit of the system and recommendations and documentations around the policies that surround the use and maintenance and administration of the CRM system. This is something that's required a little less frequently than training or even a quarterly system review are, but we go in depth to make sure that that the system is being maintained properly and governed properly from a high level. And of course, we also offer a quarterly support block of hours for whatever customers may need. It enables them to budget these sorts of services in advance and to know that they have a credit with us so that they don't need to go back through approval every time they need some assistance with a complex report, things like that. So these are all designed to assist our customers in making the best possible use of the system, to increasing the adoption among the users, and to maximizing the probability that the vision that was had before the deployment began is fully realized. With that, we appreciate you coming today. I will open up the phone lines, or you can just unmute your phone, and although you've had the chance to ask questions online in the typing form, if you'd like, please feel free to speak up on the conference call now and ask Bill any question that you may have about what's been covered. Did everybody find this to be a valuable first session? If the answer is yes, say nothing. All right, it's unanimous. Everybody loved it. Last call for questions, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. Well then, again, we appreciate you attending. I've included my contact information here, but it'll be in an email that you're about to receive containing links to all the quick reference cards that you've seen, and to a recording, and to the presentation, and later on to a link containing a recording of this event. Thank you very much for attending. We really appreciate your time today.